Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our workshop series, Self-Care During COVID. I am Dr. Kristen Bessler, one of the therapists here at University Counseling Services, and I'll be presenting throughout this workshop series. So today's topic, we're going to focus on how do I know what I need and how to make it happen. So just a quick disclaimer before we get started. While this workshop might be beneficial to the well-being of the participants and is presented by a University Counseling Services therapist, this workshop is not considered to be counseling, therapy, or treatment. So first, we're going to do a quick review of our first workshop series, which is really just defining what self-care is. So self-care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. And the goal of self-care is really to live a balanced life. So asking yourself some questions might help determine if what you're doing is self-care. What do you need right now, which is really what we're going to focus on today. In what way will whatever activity you're doing serve your mental health and wellness, physical health and wellness, emotional health and wellness? An important thing to ask yourself is, are what you're doing self-indulgence, self-care, both, or none, right? We, in our world right now, self-care can kind of be a buzzword, and sometimes self-care gets mistaken with self-indulgence. So just something to consider as we move through this practice. And another question to ask is, does what you're doing align with your values and goals? So something really important to consider, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. So it's important to know that what self-care looks like in practice is different for everyone, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later on today. So again, just to review, there are lots of different domains of self-care: physical, psychological, emotional, personal, social, spiritual, enjoyment, professional. And important to keep this in mind as we're moving through today. We're going to really start focusing on these different aspects of self-care to figure out what you need and how to make that happen. So of course, that is the big question, right? What do you need? So the first step in figuring out what do you need is figuring out what balance looks like for you, right? So like I mentioned before, self-care is going to look different for every person. We all have unique identities, backgrounds, concerns, stressors, values, environments, cultures, and all of this comes into play to figure out how self-care is going to look for each of us and what that is going to mean, right? So the important thing and question to ask yourself is, what does self-care going to look like for you to improve and maintain your wellness, right? So this diagram here on the right is just a depiction of these different aspects of self-care and how they all work together to create balance, right? It's important to note that not every circle will be equally balanced. It just needs to be the right balance to work for you. So steps 2 and 3 is to pause, right? Pause and assess where you're at. Identify what's going well and what is going not so well for you, right? Before we can move forward, we really need to pause and figure out where we're at now. So take some time to truly understand yourself, where you're at. How are you currently engaging in self-care? How is that working out for you? What's going well? What's going not so well? What might be missing in your life? What might you need more of, right? What are the areas you want to spend more energy and time? And also, what are the areas you might be spending too much time and energy that maybe it would be helpful to spend less time and energy on? So in order to kind of figure out where we're at, what we need, we're going to do a little activity. So this is a self-care assessment. It's going to go through those different domains of self-care. So how it works is we're going to go through a list of different self-care activities and topics in each self-care domain. So as we're going through this, feel free to pause this video, take some time to jot down some notes, figure out what works for you. You can even take a screenshot if you want to, and go back through this. This isn't just a one-time process, but what we're going to do is go through each of the different domains, And while you're going through the list, I want you to rate two things. Right? One is how much time and energy are you putting into whatever particular activity it is, right? One being no energy, five being this is something you do frequently and consistently. The second question to ask yourself is, how important is this to me, right? And again, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not important at all, 2 being extremely important. So to get started, we're going to first start off with physical self-care, right? So again, rating each of these different domains into how much time and energy you're putting into each of these and how important it is to you, right? So physical self-care includes eating, exercise, medical care, taking time off when you need to, doing physically fun activities like dancing, swimming, walking, sports, whatever that is for you, getting enough sleep, wearing clothes you like, taking trips or vacations, taking time away from telephones, really focusing on that physical aspect of yourself. Right. And the next domain we're going to touch on is psychological self care. So, activities that fall into the category of psychological self care, making time for self reflection, having your own personal therapy, writing in a journal, reading literature unrelated to your work, decreasing the stress in your life, letting others know about different aspects of you, noticing your inner experiences, engaging your intelligence in a new area, practice receiving from others, being curious, saying no to extra responsibilities at times. And again, rating each of these, how much time and energy do you put into it, and how important is this to you? Emotional self-care. So things that fall into the emotional self-care category, spending time with others whose company you enjoy, staying in contact with the important people in your life, giving yourself affirmations, praising yourself, self-love, rereading your favorite books, watching your favorite movies, seeking out and identifying comforting activities, objects, people, relationships, places, allowing yourself to cry, finding things that make you laugh, expressing outrage with social action, letters, donations, marches, protests, playing with animals, always a great way to engage in emotional self-care. Right? So again, as we're going through this, rate these things and notice any reactions, responses you're having internally to any of these things, right? So for some people, these different activities will totally fit in line with what makes sense for their self-care. For other folks, the same thing might be the opposite of self-care for them, right? And so it's important to focus on what makes sense for you, right? If you don't like animals, playing with animals is not going to help your emotional self care, right? But if you're someone who loves animals and misses your pets at home, playing with animals, going to a shelter could be a great way to engage in emotional self care. And then there's personal self care, right? So things that go into personal self care, ongoing self reflection, learning who you are and what matters to you, planning short and long term goals. And this is learning a hobby. That means learning a hobby that interests you, limiting social and news media when it feels unhelpful, finding a creative outlet, whether that's music, writing, journaling, art, crafts, painting, whatever fits for you, relaxing, right? Taking intentional time to relax, recharge, rest. We all need these things at different times, right? And then there's social self-care, right? And this is something that can be quite challenging during the current state that we're in with pandemic and quarantine and social distancing. But there's still ways to do this and figure this out. And in the future workshop series, we're going to really talk about how do you engage in this social self-care? How do you create and maintain relationships during the current pandemic and even outside of the pandemic? right? But things that go into social self-care are spending time with people you like, calling or writing to friends and family who are far away, having stimulating conversations, meeting new people, even if that's virtually meeting them, spending time alone with romantic partners, asking others for help, doing enjoyable activities with other people, right? And again, even in times of social distancing, that could mean taking a walk while wearing a mask and being 6 feet apart, right? Staying in touch with people and maintaining connections with old friends, new friends, family, right? And again, a big part of this self care is doing these things intentionally, right? Really carving out time for these different activities. And then there's professional academic self care, right? Improving your professional academic skills, whether that's study skills or knowledge, interests, saying no to excessive responsibilities when that's going to be helpful, right? Taking on projects that are interesting or rewarding to you, learning new things that are associated with your major or your potential future career, taking time to build relationships with professors, classmates, advisors, mentors, taking breaks between classes or when studying, and maintaining a balance between academics and personal life, keeping a comfortable and tidy workspace. All of these different activities go into this professional academic self-care topic and domain, right? And again, as we're going through these, notice any internal reactions and rate each of these things by how much energy, time you're putting into it and how important it is to you, right? And we're going to go through why we're rating these towards the end of this. And there's spiritual self-care, right? And that can look different for everyone, right? Making time for reflection, spending time in nature, finding a spiritual connection or community, being open to inspiration, cherishing your optimism and your hope, being aware of the non-material aspects of your life, at times trying to let go, not being in charge or being the expert, being curious and open to not knowing, identifying and what's meaningful to you and notice its place in your life, right? It could mean meditating, praying, singing, having experiences of awe or excitement or amazement, right? And contributing to causes that you believe in. So we just went through a huge list, and as big as that list was, it was also non-exhaustive, right? So you might be thinking to yourself, well, I do this thing and I thought it was self-care, but it's not on this list, right? That doesn't mean it's not self-care. It means if it works for you, sometimes it can be helpful to identify which domain that might go in for you. For some folks, you might be looking through this list and thinking, well, I thought that feels more like personal self-care, not spiritual self-care to me. Or maybe that feels like spiritual self-care, not so much psychological self-care for me, right? That's okay. Again, we're not trying to find the one right way to engage in self-care. We're trying to figure out how you personally, truly deep down know what you need, not what other people tell you you feel like you should need, right? So again, going back through, I know we went through a lot of that very quickly. So if it would be helpful to finish up this workshop and then go back to the video and kind of go through that again on your own, might be helpful, right? And once you've gone through and you've rated all of these different things, right? Again, and how much time and energy you're putting into each one of those and how important that is to you, right? Step 4 is to review your results, right? And the reason that we are rating these things is because we want to look at both discrepancies in those two numbers for each items and also similarities in the numbers, right? So if you're seeing discrepancies in your numbers, right, you're rating something low in terms of the time and energy you're putting into it and high in terms of its importance in your life, this might be an area that needs more attention and focus, right? And if, again, the opposite, if you're rating something high in energy and low in importance, that might be an area where you might be able to shift your energy away from that and into something that is more important for you. Okay. And again, look at similarities in your numbers. If you're rating something high in energy and high in importance, keep it up. You're doing the right thing for you and your self-care. Whereas if you're rating something low in energy and low in importance, this just might not be an aspect of self-care that's meaningful for you, right? Maybe it doesn't work for you, and that's okay, right? We don't need to be doing all of these things all of the times. And in fact, that would probably be quite unhelpful and overwhelming, right? And we can also review results in kind of a bigger framework, right? So looking at each whole domain, and are some of these domains maybe less important, some might be more. And again, looking at discrepancies and similarities in the overall numbers for each domain as well. And then the next step, the second part of this workshop is how do you make it happen, right? So you've identified what matters to you, what's important, what do you need for your self-care. Self-care, remember the definition, is an intentional activity that you're doing deliberately, right? So this is an action, a behavior. So how do we make it happen? Step 5, be specific and come up with a specific plan, right? We can really get in our heads about we're going to do all of these things tomorrow or next week or when we have time or after the exams are over. And we really need to get specific with what we want to work on, when we're going to do it, right? So come up with a plan. What is one specific domain you want to focus on, right? And what's one specific activity you want from that domain, right? If you're going to add more energy, where are you going to get that from? We only have so much energy to give. So we need to maybe look at those things that aren't so important to us that we're giving a lot of energy to right now, right? Taking some from there, giving it to what matters for you, right? Be specific. When are you going to do it? A date, a time, for how long, where? Is there anything you need to prepare ahead of time? Is there anything that's going to get in your way? Right? And how are you going to get past these things that could get in your way? Right? Speaking of things that can get in your way, oftentimes ourselves are what can get in our way. Right? So step 6 is being aware of the traps and the trip ups when trying to engage in self-care. So these are just some ways of thinking that can sometimes get in our way of actually practicing self-care. Right? One is the caretaker mindset, which is I'm fine, I'll survive, I can handle my own stuff. It's really important for me to focus my energy on helping others, right? And of course, helping others is not a bad thing at all, right? And it's also important that we help ourselves and focus on ourselves as well, right? There's the superhero mindset. I should be able to cope. I should be able to handle this. If I need to slow down and engage in self-care, it means that I'm doing something wrong or I'm weak. Time, I think, is almost everyone's excuse for not engaging in self-care, right? I'm too busy, I have too much to do. Once this happens, right, coming in with the competing priorities, once I do X, Y, or Z, then I'll have some time for self-care, right? Once I finish all my assignments, then I can do something for my self-care practice, right? Once midterms are done, once this, once that. And what ends up happening is we never get to the self-care, right? And then there's also the perceived value, right? That sometimes we place little value on self-care, right? It's a waste of time. It's not something that you deserve. Other things are more important. Right? Routine, starting the practice of self-care or really engaging in a consistent, deliberate practice can be challenging, right? As it is with all new habits and routines that we create, right? So this mindset is you want to do something for your self-care, and I'm assuming most of you do who are watching this, or else you wouldn't be watching it, right? But you just can't get into the habit, right? Guilt is something I hear a lot from students, right? That self-care is not productive. I need to be studying, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing that. I don't have time for self-care. Again, I'm too busy and I should be doing something more productive, right? When the reality is that self-care is productive, right? It sets you up to do all of those other things well. There's also that trap and trip up of culture and environment, right? Everyone around me is stressed. No one else is practicing self-care, right? We don't know that no one else is practicing self-care. And if they're not, it might be helpful for them too, right? Self-care is important. And just because everyone else is stressed out doesn't mean that that's healthy, right? In step 7, right, like I said, self-care is the action. So take the leap and go for it. We can easily get caught up in that mindset of, again, like I'll do it tomorrow when I have more time, and we don't actually do it, right? We think and we think and we think, but until we act, we're not actually engaging in self-care. And it can feel like a risk to try something new, right? We may have doubts or worries or fears. Know that you can hold both those doubts, those worries, those fears, and acknowledging them can be quite helpful. And you can still do these things that matter to you. They don't need to get in your way or stop you. Right? Remind yourself that you're a priority, right? That self care isn't something that needs to come secondary. In step 8, reassess how it went, right? This is an experiment, right? It's something new. It's not something that you pick this one self care activity and you do it consistently and you're done. Some things will work, others might not, right? The things that are working out for you, keep doing them. The things that aren't working out for you, check in with yourself. Why might they not be working, right? If it's just not a good fit, it's just not a good fit, and that's okay, right? Also assess what it feels like mentally, emotionally, physically to prioritize yourself, right? And to prioritize your health, right? If it didn't work out and you had this plan and it didn't follow through, again, this is an experiment, right? Notice what gets in your way and troubleshoot for next time, right? And remember that engaging in one self care activity is a start, and the most effective self care is an ongoing, consistent practice. So keep checking in with yourself. It might take some time to really evaluate how this practice is going for you and what's working, what might not be working so well. Right? And keep doing it, right? Once you find something that works, keep it up. Review your assessment, your rating, what we went through today, add in another self care practice, right? And reevaluate your self care needs regularly. As we grow and we change and our environment, stress, circumstances change over time, what makes for an effective self care practice for each of us may also change. Right? And lastly, give yourself credit, right? Give yourself credit for being here today, for taking the time to attend this workshop and to prioritize your wellness, right? And know that moving forward, we're going to have more workshop series, and we'll have all of these recorded and on our website for you to use at your own pace. You can choose the ones that fit for you, that you feel like you might need to focus on, and attend at your own pace and see what works for you. And lastly, be well and take care of yourself.